Hello and welcome to the Rippling Pages with me, Liam Bishop, curating the best writers to inspire you and your writing. Yenga is here to discuss her life and writing. She was born in Chengdu, Sichuan province, in the People's Republic of China. Emerging as a prodigious writer in Chinese and Sichuanese, she was named as one of China's 20 future literary masters by People magazine. In 2012, she was chosen as Best New Writer by the prestigious Chinese Literature Media Prize. For English language readers, however, Nicky Harman first translated her novella White Horse for Hope Road Publishing in 2014, a story about young girls negotiating adolescence in the presence of a mysterious white horse. Then, 4 years later, Nicky translated the Chilli Bean Paste Clan in 2018, and that was published by Balestier. Set in a fictional village in Sichuan province where Yenga herself grew up, it focuses on a family who own, as the title indicates, a chili bean paste factory. Several generations of a family are preparing for a grandmother's 80th birthday despite a philandering father's attempts to derail the plans. Strange Beasts of China was then published by Tilted Axis Press in 2020, and this time it was translated by Jeremy Tiang. That was named as one of the New York Times notable books of 2021, and it's an alluring and mysterious story about mythical beasts. Whatever it was, it suggested a writer of extraordinary range, even if we didn't have all of her work translated into English. So when Yenga published Elsewhere in 2023 with Faber, she treated us to a new dimension of her work entirely, short fiction, and for the first time, written directly into English. There's still so much of Yenga's work that hasn't been translated. Clearly, she's a writer who continues to defy expectations of her readers and perhaps herself. Yen, thank you so much for joining me on the Rippling Pages. Delighted to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Lee, and I'm also very excited to talk about all the books.
Thank you. And there's quite a few books, isn't there, to talk about. Before we get going, just remember to like, share, follow, subscribe, leave a review of the Rippling Pages if you enjoy the show. Tell your friends about it to help us grow. But yeah, well, actually, I should say we are connected, sort of by Leeds, which I don't often have on the podcast.
Yeah, Leeds is a very special place to me. It was the city that I first visited when I first visited the UK. And I've been repeatedly coming back to Leeds throughout the years. I always felt like Leeds is my sort of Anglophone hometown. Like I always
Wow.
feel like coming back here, I feel like the English me feels like at home. I was
Yeah.
like, I think before COVID, I fantasized about like after finishing my MFA program, I'd move to Leeds. I literally, it was like not only a fantasy. At one point, I was like reaching out to people, talking about them, thinking about like looking at right moves.
Wow.
um,
Well, what a compliment that is. Leeds is my Anglophone home. Obviously, you worked with the Centre for New Chinese Writing.
yeah, the Leeds Center for New Chinese Writing. They're like at the University of Leeds.
Right, okay. Yeah, and I know it a little bit. I've been to some of their events, and I know you've done some events up here. Well, I'm glad that you've got such a lovely perception of Leeds. But yeah, now in Norwich.
I think Norwich is such a great place for writers, for just people who are slightly eccentric and does not quite want to do like a 9 to 5 job, and we're just a bunch of observers.
Fair enough. I just because I know you've got there's the East Anglia Writing Centre down there, isn't there? Obviously, I've had a few people
Yeah,
who
I
work in that
teach
there.
like part-time
Right. Okay.
sometimes for the National Center for Writing here based in Norwich, or like bits and pieces. Like I sometimes go to UEA to teach a class here and there. But yeah, that's because I'm working on my novel, which is like a full-time job.
So, are you writing that novel in English or Chinese?
Yeah, I'm writing that in English.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a real shift. Like I feel I've been kind of drifting away from Chinese language, from my Chinese writer's identity. Yeah, it maybe I'll come back. It's not necessarily like some irreversible journey. Maybe it's just like a big loop. But that's where I am now. It's like I felt very estranged in a way, in a sad way.
Interesting. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we start with your stories that were written in English? And it's called Elsewhere. Elsewhere, I mean, first things first is, and slightly related to what you just said, Elsewhere seems quite apt as a title. You always seem to be sort of taken as elsewhere in your work and writing. There's stories that are set in modern day Ireland, which I think is where you lived at one point, Beijing during the 2008 Olympics, and then there are some that where we might call more ancient China itself. Um, just tell us about this experience then of writing elsewhere.
Yeah, so Elsewhere was really like a last minute title because I think what happened was I decided to kind of trying out to write in English. And then I think I came into the game rather kind of frivolously, kind of like, oh, I'm just gonna have a try. I often joke about this as sort of my getaway from my mid-age crisis as a writer in Chinese. Because when I kind of took on this adventure, I've been working in Chinese and for so many years, and to the point you're kind of like, you have a very solid established version or a vision of yourself and to be like, this is who I am. Those are the things I write. This is how I write as a writer. Whereas coming into English is like all kind of just wild open now, like all the possibilities, what kind of writer you want to be, what kind of stories you want to tell. So I think I really took that opportunity kind of on this kind of empty canvas of me being a writer in English. I just tried out all sorts of different things. But then they're like very confusingly drastically different actually. So at one point I actually sent several stories to my agent to say, can you tell me which path I should take? I feel like those things are like you cannot really put them together and they're incompatible, I felt. I think gradually, like maybe it took me maybe 2 to 3 years. I think it might have been from 20. I've been working on the stories in this collection and other things, obviously, but eventually I picked all those stories and then put them into a collection. When I sent this to my agent, it's called Nine Stories. Because again, I just could not find any concept, any idea, any title among those nine stories that could somehow encapsulate the the really varied like locations and sometimes even like in style. I feel like I just could not find one thing that could encapsulate all of these things. And my agent was like, well, we need to think of a name. But it since has really grown on me, and I could really see those stories are meant to be called Elsewhere because that is actually the theme that could bring all of them together. And like you were saying, they're just like, they're set in different places, set in different temporal spaces. One thing I knew for sure at the beginning is I was going to do something drastically different. I was not going to repeat anything I had, any sort of skills or any like, I was not going to link back to any of the comfort zones I had as a writer in Chinese.
This sounds probably a little bit, a bit of a cliche, but every time you turn onto a new story, you are kind of you are in somewhere else. You're in a different space. Completely. You've got, for instance, shooting an elephant, which refers to George Orwell's essay in the plot to some extent. High, which focuses on comedy set in Confucius's time, but sort of knowing what I know about the books we've seen translated into English, was it then a case of I have to write like this because this is something that I need to go through, to learn this kind of not to learn this craft, but to get to these stories, I need to sort of go through this process of, going crazy, as you said, or was it more of there wasn't a way to fit a wider idea into, something, like a bigger novel or something like that?
Mm, I think it was really organic. Like I said, which was like such a bless actually for a writer. Like I mean career wise, because at that point I don't think I was like physically super old, but but I was like a mid-career writer at that point in Chinese. So I felt, and very often when you're at that point, like obviously it was a very fortunate position to be in, that you were often thinking about the prospect of being published whenever you're working on anything. So you think a lot about the readership, about like the potential conversations you might be having with your editor. I mean, I think I tried my best to not let any of those things deter me from doing anything or like disrupt my organic writing process. But I think nevertheless, they definitely got in. This was me still writing in Chinese, being at that point of my career. And I think coming into English and then writing through all those stories, and I had no idea, and I genuinely did not think any of them would be published, never mind being published into a book. So I just had no idea to whom I'm writing and why should I like, am I representing it? Like nothing. It kind of just felt very personal, very organic.
But so it was a significant. So it sounds like, I don't know. Do you feel like it was a kind of new relationship you were trying to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I do think when you're in a different language, just even, your sort of daily, your everyday persona is quite different. I think the language really shapes your way of thinking, your way of like just having the voice. It's very different. Like, you wanted to create like tension within sentences, within segments of sentences, within a paragraph. You wanted to create and sustain and potentially push up this tension when you kind of write through a story or a novel, whatever it is. Bring up like in Chinese, when the writer brings up an apple, this is a really silly sort of random example. It doesn't really have any sort of actual meaning. When you bring up apple in Chinese, the apple has like cultural and literary connotations that will be perceived by the Chinese readers who are simmering in the same cultural literary pool with the writer throughout, centuries, right? We have those marinated sort of grounds that we share. So then when you're talking about a thing, it's never just the thing itself. It's all the rippling effect of culturally and linguistically and also literally. You're talking about all the other things. And that just doesn't exist then when you come to a different language. First, you don't necessarily understand all the cultural and literary connotations of all the things that you have in this language, in your learned language. And you certainly don't know how to use that to connect, to kind of have that sort of rippling effect, to know if you're talking about an apple in English, what does that mean? What does that connote? And then how would other people perceive that? And you pretty much have no idea. So then you have to then create like a different kind of a different set of like linguistic links. You'd have to create like a new context. In a way, maybe this context is like exclusive within the stories, within the text that you created, because you reach to like the far end of the culture because you're actually just being transplanted. But at the same time, I think that creates this very thrilling, really reinvigorating sort of strangeness or newness for both me and maybe the potential reader to be like, oh, we're just using this language in a completely different way. The language is being deracinated, but at the same time, it gains this wild freedom. And so am I.
How does some of those experiences then translate into the experiences you had translate into what the characters experience? Because there's some of those things that the way that you're talking about linguistic and cultural differences, I think they're experienced by some of the characters in very different ways. Because you write at different time points at different periods throughout all the stories. But how did that sort of go into how you constructed the narrative for some of the characters within elsewhere?
I feel all the characters, some of them, some of the stories, and you can see in a very clear sense, I felt they're like more autobiographical and they kind of, those stories kind of represent more directly of like my own experience as immigrants. Say in stories like Shooting an Elephant, I feel there's definitely like a large like overlap of what my life was like living in Dublin, and then Shan Shan, the character's life, was like living in Dublin. And I feel some of them are definitely more sort of I take the emotional truth of the character directly from myself. Some of the characters, I think their emotional truth, their like drive, um, were more fictionalized. They're like more invented, say for most of the characters in the last story and in some of other stories. But I feel fundamentally maybe all the stories or what I'm interested in is the inability of communication fundamentally is like no matter which language you're using. Although I would really reject this notion if anyone else brought it up to be like, yeah, and this is what your book is about, because I feel any book, any story is to defy this kind of aboutness or a singular aboutness. But if I have to say, I feel like in elsewhere, all the things were just really about this extreme sense, like this irreparable sense of isolation. I guess probably that's what like I often say, and if I were teaching a workshop, I'd be like, fundamentally, there's no happy short stories.
Is that something to do with how is that something to do with resolution and how perhaps a happy ending is one where things come together and everything's tied up neatly. Does the kind of fragmented nature of the short story, because the characters that you write about, and I wasn't trying to ask, are these autobiographical stories or anything like that, but it's just the way you were talking about different cultures and different languages and experiences of writing in different languages. Is there something, the characters don't strike me as happy characters. And does that then come from that sense of isolation? Because that is difficult,
Yeah,
isn't it? That is difficult to isolation is quite an interesting thing and theme, isn't it? It's hard to maybe feel complete or resolved if you are isolated, maybe.
mm, I feel like happiness sort of a sort of restful, a peaceful life, maybe. And it's always elsewhere. I think fundamentally that's when you are like, because lots of writers of like, uh, of immigrant backgrounds, they talk about this sensation of like deracination. You were uprooted from your original culture, but then you are kind of like you then were existing really in a third space. You don't belong neither here nor there. It could happen, it could manifest in a big way in the sense of somebody moving country, but it could also being seen in a very being experienced in a very small way in the way you look back to your childhood with this like shin of like pure joy, and then you would never be able to get back there because you're always trapped again elsewhere. You cannot. I think we always have this kind of duality going on in most people's life. I mean, we see the. I feel like for me, the biggest question, or for lots of characters, the biggest question is like, what if I've never left my home country? What if I have never done that? And then what would that have been? Like, what would that life, the life I have never lived, maybe that would be a better life. That would be a more peaceful life. Maybe what I'm trying to say is I am I am absolutely not a very happy person. And I feel like I am constantly struggling. And although, like I'm not saying like I'm not fun to be around with, like I'll be going to a place, I'll be hanging out with, there are always like those fleeting and transient joyful moments. But I think the fundamental elements in life, at least in my life, a reader, like that's why people like us consider literature so important to our lives. Because I think if you're just like a through and through joyless person, I don't know, you might be just go, I don't know, play video games or just do something. Like, why would you read books? I feel they wouldn't be thinking, oh, I'm gonna sit down and read Infinite Jest.
Well, yeah, maybe not. But I mean, is it about then qualifying that experience for you, or is that a problem? I guess then for you to say you're not happy, and how does that relate to, or is that the kind of way of the world? Is this the reality of things, that happiness is this kind of construct? So I guess in relation maybe to some of the characters you write about as well.
I suppose fundamentally, if we don't have anything we're striving for, like if we are just completely at peace, like content, and then what's the point of living, isn't it? I guess for me, like maybe not necessarily on a personal level, but definitely in terms of my artistic practice, I always wanted to go somewhere else. Like I never wanted to stay in the place where I feel like artistically, I never wanted to stay in the place where I already feel very comfortable and doing the things that I already know how to do. I never want to do that. If I enter a project knowing what I'm going to do confidently, and then I would never do this project. It has to be, this thing has to be kind of almost like formidable at the point of initiation, at the point of conceiving. It has to be like, I have no idea, like if I can possibly, humanly possibly do this. And that would be the thing that would really excite me. So I think, in a way, like I am like looking for trouble, looking for endurance, looking for suffering.
I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll have a quick break on the Rippling Pages. Do come back. We're going to talk more to Yenga about her work. So yeah, I'm going to get another coffee, Yen. I don't know about you. Now, if I owned a bookshop, it would look like the Rippling Pages. And the Rippling Pages does have a bookshop. Now, it's not a real bookshop, it's an online bookshop, and it's hosted by bookshop.org.uk. Now, I've got all the books from all the guests that have appeared on the show on my own webpage for the Rippling Pages. So if you go on there, you can see Yen's books, you can see Benjamin Markovit's book, you can see Vincenzo Lotronico's book. All of the guests that have appeared on the Rippling Pages are there. The great thing about bookshop.org.uk is that they source all of their books from independent booksellers. So if you order from there, it's come from an independent bookshop somewhere in the country. Not only that, if you order directly from the Rippling Pages store, I get a very small commission, which is it's super helpful. I won't tell you this if I didn't think it was important, but that commission that I get from any books bought in the bookshop goes straight back into the podcast. I've got to pay for website hosting, technology upgrades, all that kind of thing, subscriptions to help with the social media outputs. So yeah, please do consider buying the books if you've enjoyed today or any other episode from the Rippling Pages Bookshop. There's a link in the show notes. Okay, let's get back into it. Welcome back to the Rippling Pages. When you write in shooting an elephant, and the character's in Ireland, and I think she's recently moved there, and she says about quietly. This is what you write. Quietly, she pronounced the word, her tongue curling back, brushing against the upper palate with a soft tingling. Ireland. That to me just captures this sense of a challenge, that really visceral image of we can form words, we can form language, and we can feel it. It's within us, it's oral, it's perceptible, but the meaning is different. The meaning can elude us, and not to say that that's what the character's doing here, but it was just really someone for me trying to grapple and grasp at where they were in the world and what that means. And so I guess talking about the challenge then of, this sort of level of suffering you said that you give yourself, how does it start for you? Because obviously you've got there's 8 or so stories, and you said you wrote them in a different time points and different settings and brought them together. But, what is that? When does that mountain appear in front of you to say that this is the one that I'm going to try and scale? And do you ever scale it?
I guess for the stories, you could say like they really they generate one another sort of in this mysterious way. But I guess that's how any creative process is like. You kind of just, your mind is like your mind is really traveling down this string, like, kind of being nudged and pushed, catapulted by all the torrents. And then you're just like, completely at the disposal of whatever the external force that is there, like until you land on the point, you're like, okay, maybe I wanted to do this for a little bit. And you work on that. You're like almost like resisting the external force that is going to take you anywhere. And again, that's something I feel even like in practice, in a very sort of detailed sense, in a very zoomed in sense, that when I work on the pages, whenever I feel like I'm writing very happily and smoothly, I will stop. Which is again, it's like, why do you do this to yourself yet? Because I always see that as a bad sign. If I'm like kind of writing very happily about whatever, if I think it's going well, just from a sentence to sentence level, like on the page, I will stop because I just think Well, because you can't trust yourself. You do trust yourself. Me thinking I was gonna stop is also part of my thinking process. But you don't want to trust like the most sort of buoyant and superficial layer of you. You'd be like, no, 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 no. You're just like you're now too kind of jolly. Very often than not, I think I was right. But again, this is obviously almost like a self-fulfilling circle. Is like, of course, I would seem to be right to myself because I was my own judge. I think so much of the language or like this the idea of like being a stranger in a foreign land it's visceral. It's like sorry, it's like irrational. It's like, I understand how this works. I understand how this language works, but my body doesn't understand. I think it's a
Uh,
long journey, or maybe it's a journey you can never really arrive at this fulfilling point where your body relaxes completely into the new setting. That you always have those extra pressure then going on at the back of your mind when you are like navigating through this kind of foreignness, when you are sort of being perceived as a foreign object, at the same time navigating through the foreignness of the landscape of the everyday of your of the community of the external world. And I think so much of that is really burdening to your body, to your physicality, because your body is like, I guess so many of the stories or the things, like even the thing I'm working on now, I feel like I am trying to imitate, I'm trying to like represent that kind of experience, maybe in different ways via different sort of setups, but I am trying to like emulate that experience in my writing, in my stories of this kind of like, sort of rationally we acknowledge it, but my body completely rejects it. That kind of sort of weird like discrepancy, weird like I can't catch up with myself.
because you do write quite a bit about the body. You do write about the body, but you write about the body or the way that it's processed on some level is a dissonance. There's a dissonance between the maybe lived experience reality and the kind of perceived reality. Um,
Mm.
and that does come out in the text, I think, quite a bit. And you do write about characters that sometimes seem to be split between. I don't want to call it selves, but yeah, it's more that idea of a perceived reality and a lived experience reality, and that's at a kind of dissonance. You see, because we feel that and we know that and we experience that, but how do you write about that? Because I think I know how you write about it to some extent because I can see it and I interpret that in the characters and some of the experience of that. But how do you put that into writing? Is it important that you do that or?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't have a plan. Like I who said that? They said some writers are some writers go into a story with a map. Some writers go into a story with a compass. And I feel maybe I'm more like a compass kind of person. It's not to say I don't have a map. I probably have like a hand drawn map. It's like a sketch, like a very wonky sketch. I'm
Okay.
like, oh, that's where I'm gonna go. But I don't have a map, right? I never have a map. And so yeah, I think fundamentally, I never know how I like. Now, every time when I read, when I obviously it's not for my own enjoyment, it's kind of sometimes for work or for other reasons. Like I happen to be reading something I wrote myself previously. Say if I were going through a story and elsewhere for whatever reason, I never understood how I wrote this story. Like I just never know how it happened. And more horrifyingly is that I do not believe that even until today that I can write a book. Like I think this happens to a lot of people, to a lot of writers. Like I know I talk to other people. We kind of just we come out of a project, we finish it, and we just could not really know how it happened. And then most devastatingly is then we never believe we have possessed this ability to write. George Saunders says, sometimes when you think about like how to write a story, it's just he called that like a sustained musicality, and he was like, every story has its unique musicality. You find it, you sustain it. How to sustain that, and in a practical sense, is to go from one sentence to another, is to see how the sentences unfurl from sentence A to sentence B, then how they're connected. I feel so many of the stories, or in so many of those occasions for me, it's like that. Is you go from one point, like a minuscule point, to another. Like you really don't have a bigger picture most of the time. But what makes all those things mine is because all the things that goes onto the page would have to go through me. And I think that happens to everybody. This is what creative process is like. It's like this exercise of like your individuality, and this everything that goes in would go through you, and you don't need to think about yourself when you really are working on the story. You yourself, like your taste, your value, the things you want to say, your experiences, they will be there inevitably because they have to go through you. But at the same time, I don't think I would think a lot about like, oh, I wanted to make this character like me, or like even yesterday I was like talking to my husband after dinner, which he was not very happy about. He was like, I don't want to hear anything more about any of this project. I was like, like in my novel, like, because I'm working on it, I was like, she's like holding a flyer. Do you think she should like wave the flyer up or like down? And he's like, how do I know? So we went on for like 20 minutes. Like I was like, I got like a piece of paper. I was like, do you think in which direction this flyer should go, like in this particular point of this conversation? And he's like, oh, just leave me alone. He was watching some football game. He was like, just leave me alone.
All right.
And I think that is like on a daily basis. That's what I'm agonizing over, like most of the time. It's not about anything bigger, really.
That's about the verisimilitude, isn't it? That's a kind of about how does this look in reality, but there's also you've spoken there about. Oh, I find it really interesting. You visualize it, and not every writer might do this, but they've not visualized it, or the people I spoke to in the way that you've put it, which is everything sort of comes through me and comes out of me, and that means for me when you say that, that means that there are parts of me that I am not completely aware of that go into this, that go onto the page, and I think that's something that you can see within your stories. Then I mean, you think about. I know this is a novel that was written over 20 years ago now for you. The Strange Beasts of China. This is about a person who is identifying with things that are otherized, beasts, mythical, and she's trying to find these beasts, these mythical beasts within China, and she engages with them. She kisses them. She touches them, approaches them. And I'm not trying to say this is what's happening with, you and your writing process, but I think you do write about these experiences where people are identifying with things that feel different or distinct from themselves, but could be related to them in some way and embracing them maybe as well.
Yeah. I don't know, honestly. I really don't know. I most of the time I feel I'm completely failing this game, and I'm kind of hanging on the cliff. May I say, I also think this just about hanging on the cliff is my comfort zone as a writer. If I feel like I'm on solid ground, I'm like, oh, something is wrong.
That's it for part one of our conversation with Yen Ge. We're leaving it on a literal cliffhanger. How about that, eh? Join us next time for part two. We talk more about her early work in China and how that influenced her work. See you then.